In the eerie silence of the abandoned morgue at the old hospital, Jessica's life had turned into a living nightmare. Her volunteer work had brought her to this derelict building, where shadows whispered secrets and the air was thick with the scent of decay. What she didn't know was that something far more sinister than neglect haunted these halls. It all started with a misplaced set of keys. Jessica had been helping to catalog old medical records when she noticed her keys were missing from her bag. Assuming she had simply dropped them, she retraced her steps through the labyrinthine corridors. The walls, peeling with age, seemed to close in on her, and every sound echoed unnervingly. As she searched, she heard a soft, almost imperceptible laugh echoing through the empty halls. Her heart pounded, but she dismissed it as her imagination. The following day, Jessica found herself more on edge than usual. The oppressive atmosphere of the old hospital seemed to seep into her skin, making her feel constantly watched. She tried to focus on her work, flipping through brittle pages of ancient records, but her mind kept wandering back to the mysterious laugh. She couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. Days later, strange symbols began to appear, drawn in the dust on the windows and walls. They were crude and jagged, like something a child might draw, but they filled her with an inexplicable dread. Jessica's unease grew with each passing day. The symbols seemed to follow her, appearing wherever she went, as if they were trying to tell her something. Then the notes began to appear, chilling messages left in places only she would find, describing her daily routine in unnerving detail. The first note was taped to the inside of her locker. "I like your hair down." Jessica's hands trembled as she read it, the realization dawning that someone was watching her every move. She tore the note down and stuffed it in her pocket, her heart racing. Over the next few days, the notes continued to appear. "You look pretty when you smile," one said, left on the windshield of her car. Another was slipped under her apartment door. "You should wear blue more often." Each message was more unsettling than the last, each one a reminder that she was never truly alone. The final note was different. "I see you." It was scrawled in red ink on the mirror in her bathroom, the words dripping down like blood. Jessica's breath caught in her throat as she stared at the message. Jessica's nights were plagued by nightmares, reflecting her waking fears. The notes and symbols haunted her thoughts, creeping into every corner of her mind. She could barely concentrate at work, her nerves frayed to the point of breaking. Each time she passed a darkened hallway or an empty room, she felt eyes boring into her back. One evening, as she was preparing to leave, she found a small, intricately carved box on her desk. The box was old, its wood weathered and darkened with age, but beautifully crafted. Her hands trembled as she opened it to reveal an old photograph of a young girl in a hospital gown. Scribbled on the back were the words, "Do you remember me?" Jessica's heart raced as she examined the photograph more closely. The girl in the picture looked eerily familiar, with the same dark hair and striking eyes. Her breath caught in her throat as she recognized the background of the photograph. It was her own bedroom. Panic surged through her, and she dropped the photograph, stumbling back from her desk. Someone had been in her home. Desperate for answers, she pored over the hospital's records late into the night, searching for any clue about the girl in the photograph. The hours ticked by, the only sounds the rustling of paper and the occasional creak of the old building. Finally, she found a mention of a young girl who had died under mysterious circumstances years ago. Her name was Emily Parker, and she had been a patient in the hospital's psychiatric ward. The more Jessica uncovered about Emily, the more she realized there was a dark connection between them. Emily had been admitted to the hospital after claiming she was being watched and followed, just as Jessica was now. The hospital staff had dismissed her fears as delusions, and she had died under suspicious circumstances not long after. Determined to learn more, Jessica reached out to one of the hospital's former employees, an elderly nurse named Margaret. Margaret was reluctant to talk at first, but eventually she agreed to meet with Jessica. They arranged to meet in a small CAF GC near the hospital. Margaret arrived, her face lined with age and worry. She glanced around nervously before sitting down opposite Jessica. "I don't have much time," she whispered, her voice trembling. "If they find out I'm talking to you..." "Please," Jessica pleaded. "I need to know about Emily Parker. What happened to her?" Margaret sighed heavily, her eyes filling with tears. Emily was a sweet girl, but she was troubled. She insisted someone was watching her, following her. The doctors thought she was paranoid, delusional, but I believed her. I saw the fear in her eyes. She wasn't imagining it. Did she ever say who it was? Jessica asked, leaning forward. Margaret shook her head. No, she never knew who it was. But there were rumors. People said the hospital was haunted, that there were spirits trapped here, unable to move on. Others believed it was something more sinister, someone who knew the hospital inside and out. Jessica shivered, her mind racing. Do you think it's the same person watching me now? I don't know, Margaret replied, her voice barely above a whisper. But be careful, Jessica. If it is the same person, they won't stop. They didn't stop for Emily. As they left the CAF GC, Jessica felt a renewed sense of urgency. The pieces were starting to come together, but she knew she was still missing something crucial. Emily's story was eerily similar to her own, but there had to be more to it. The feeling of being watched was more intense than ever, and Jessica couldn't shake the sensation that she was being followed as she walked home. That night, as she lay in bed, she heard a soft, scraping sound outside her window. Her heart pounded as she crept to the window and peeked out. In the dim light, she saw a figure standing in the shadows, staring up at her. The figure raised a hand and waved slowly, a chilling gesture that sent a jolt of terror through her. Jessica backed away from the window, her mind racing. She had to find out who was behind this and why they were targeting her. But she knew she couldn't do it alone. She needed help, and she needed it fast before it was too late. The figure outside her window was a stark reminder that she was running out of time. Determined to uncover the truth about Emily and her own stalker, Jessica decided to reach out to her best friend, Alex. She trusted him completely and knew he would take her seriously. The next morning she called him, her voice trembling with urgency. Alex, I need your help. Something's very wrong, she said, explaining everything. The missing keys, the symbols, the notes, the photograph, and the figure outside her window. I'm on my way, Alex replied without hesitation. Within an hour, Alex arrived at Jessica's apartment, concern etched across his face. We need to figure out who's behind this and why they're targeting you, he said firmly. Let's go back to the hospital and see if we can find more clues about Emily Parker and this stalker. The two of them returned to the old hospital later that day. The atmosphere was even more oppressive than Jessica remembered. They headed straight to the records room, where Jessica had first discovered the photograph of Emily. As they sifted through the dusty files, they found more records of patients who had reported similar experiences being watched, followed, and tormented. Each case ended abruptly, with no resolution and no further information. This is insane, Alex muttered, flipping through another file. There are too many coincidences. Whoever this is, they've been doing this for years. Jessica's heart sank. She felt a mixture of fear and anger. Why me? She whispered. Why now? Alex shook his head. I don't know, but we need to keep digging. There has to be something here that can help us. Hours passed, and just as they were about to give up, Jessica found a hidden drawer at the back of a filing cabinet. Inside, she discovered a stack of old, faded documents. Among them was a journal, its pages yellowed with age. The journal belonged to Dr. Harold Wilson, a psychiatrist who had worked at the hospital during the time of Emily Parker's admission. Jessica and Alex sat down and began to read through the journal. Dr. Wilson had documented his sessions with Emily in meticulous detail. He described her increasing paranoia, her fear of being watched, and her insistence that someone was following her. But as they read further, they discovered something even more disturbing. Dr. Wilson mentioned a colleague, Dr. Samuel Green, who had taken a particular interest in Emily's case. According to the journal, Dr. Green was obsessed with the idea of pushing patients to their psychological limits to observe their reactions. Emily had been one of his primary subjects. I knew there was something off about Dr. Green, Dr. Wilson wrote in one entry. His methods are unethical, bordering on sadistic. I fear for Emily's safety, but he has too much influence here. If I speak out, I risk losing my position and my career. Jessica's hands trembled as she read the words. Dr. Green has the one behind this. He must be. But if Dr. Green was doing this back then, how is he still doing it now? Alex asked. Head Bev DJ, what, in his 80s or 90s by now? Maybe he passed on his methods to someone else, Jessica suggested, her voice shaking. Or maybe he's still alive and somehow involved. We need to find him. Their search for Dr. Green led them to a secluded part of the hospital, an office that had clearly not been used in years. The door was locked, but Alex managed to pry it open with a crowbar he had found in a maintenance closet. Inside, they found a dusty, cluttered room filled with old medical equipment and stacks of papers. On the desk, they discovered a series of tapes labeled with patients' names, including Emily Parker's. Jessica's heart pounded as they played the first tape. It was a recording of one of Emily's sessions with Dr. Green. His voice was cold and clinical, devoid of any empathy as he probed into her fears. "You believe someone is watching you, Emily?" Dr. Green's voice crackled through the speaker. "Yes," Emily's voice replied, trembling. "I can feel them. They're always there, always watching." "What do they want from you?" Dr. Green asked, his tone almost mocking. "I don't know," Emily sobbed. "Please, you have to help me. I'm scared." The tape ended abruptly, and Jessica felt a wave of nausea. "This is sick," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "We have to find out if Dr. Green is still alive, and if he's the one doing this to me." Alex nodded, his jaw set in determination. "Let's get out of here and start looking. We'll find him, Jessica. We'll make sure he can't hurt anyone else." As they left the hospital, Jessica couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. The shadows seemed to move around them, and every sound made her jump. She knew they were getting closer to the truth, but the danger was growing with each step they took. And somewhere in the darkness, the stalker was watching, waiting for his next move. Jessica and Alex drove back to her apartment, the tension between them palpable. Jessica's mind raced with questions about Dr. Green and the possibility of a new stalker. She needed to find out more about him, and fast. As soon as they got inside, she grabbed her laptop and began searching online for any information she could find. After hours of digging through old articles, medical journals, and obscure online forums, Jessica stumbled upon a clue. Dr. Samuel Green had retired from the hospital years ago and had moved to a small remote town a few hours away. The articles hinted at his involvement in controversial psychological experiments, but didn't provide many details. "We need to find him," Jessica said, determination hardening her voice. "If he's still alive, he might be able to give us the answers we need." Alex nodded. "Let's go. The sooner we confront him, the better." The drive to the small town was tense, the oppressive feeling of being watched never leaving Jessica. Every passing car made her heart race, and every shadow seemed to hide a lurking figure. Alex tried to keep her spirits up, but even he was on edge, glancing frequently in the rearview mirror. They arrived in the town late in the afternoon. It was a quiet, almost desolate place, with an air of forgotten history clinging to the old buildings. They asked around, eventually finding someone who pointed them toward Dr. Green's house, a decrepit mansion on the outskirts of town, surrounded by overgrown trees and a rusting iron fence. As they approached the mansion, the sense of dread intensified. The house loomed before them, its windows dark and empty, like eyes watching their every move. Jessica hesitated at the gate, but Alex gave her a reassuring nod. They walked up the path, the crunch of gravel underfoot the only sound in the eerie silence. Jessica knocked on the door, her heart pounding. There was no answer. She knocked again, louder this time, and they heard shuffling from inside. Moments later, the door creaked open, revealing an elderly man with piercing eyes. His once stern face was lined with age, but his gaze was as sharp as ever. "Dr. Green?" Jessica asked, her voice trembling. The man nodded slowly, suspicion clouding his eyes. "Who's asking?" "My name is Jessica. This is my friend Alex. We need to talk to you about Emily Parker." At the mention of Emily's name, Dr. Green's eyes widened, and a flash of recognition crossed his face. He stepped back, allowing them inside. The interior of the mansion was as gloomy as the exterior, filled with dusty furniture and old medical books. They followed Dr. Green into a dimly lit study, where he motioned for them to sit. "Emily Parker," he said, his voice heavy with age and regret. "I never thought I'd hear that name again. What do you want to know?" Jessica took a deep breath. "I've been experiencing the same things she did, being watched, followed, tormented. I found your journal and the tapes. We need to know if you're behind this, or if someone else is continuing your work." Dr. Green's face fell, and he sighed deeply. "I never wanted any of this to happen. I was a younger man then, driven by ambition and curiosity. My methods were DJ/extreme. I pushed Emily too far, and I've regretted it every day since." "Who's doing this to me?" Jessica demanded, her fear and frustration boiling over. "Is it you?" No, Dr. Green replied, his voice trembling. It's not me, but I fear I know who it might be. I had an assistant, Matthew. He was as ambitious as I was, but he took it even further. When I retired, he took over my research. I thought he had given it up, but it seems he's continued in secret. Jessica's blood ran cold. Where can we find him? Dr. Green shook his head. I don't know. After I left, we lost touch. But he was always obsessed with the hospital. If he's still operating, he'll be there, hiding in the shadows. They left Dr. Green's mansion with more questions than answers, but at least they had a name, Matthew. As they drove back to the city, Jessica's thoughts raced. Matthew was the one tormenting her, continuing the twisted experiments that Dr. Green had started. But why her? What connection did she have to Emily Parker? That night, Jessica couldn't sleep. The fear of being watched, the constant paranoia, was overwhelming. She decided to go back to the hospital alone, needing to face Matthew and end this nightmare once and for all. She left a note for Alex, explaining her plan, and set off into the night. The hospital was even more ominous in the darkness. She made her way through the familiar corridors, flashlight in hand, her every step echoing through the empty halls. She reached the records room and started searching for any clues about Matthew's whereabouts. Suddenly, she heard a noise behind her. She spun around, the beam of her flashlight cutting through the darkness. A figure stood at the edge of the light, face obscured by shadows. "Jessica," the figure said, voice dripping with malice. "We have unfinished business." Her blood ran cold. It was Matthew. He stepped into the light, revealing a twisted smile. "You can't hide from the past," he said. "You belong here, with me." Jessica's heart pounded as she backed away, but she knew she had to confront him. She steeled herself, ready to face the nightmare head-on. Jessica's breath came in short, ragged gasps as she faced Matthew. The twisted smile on his face sent a shiver down her spine, but she stood her ground, gripping her flashlight tightly. "Why are you doing this?" she demanded, her voice trembling but determined. "Why me?" Matthew's smile widened, his eyes gleaming with a mixture of amusement and madness. "You remind me of Emily," he said, taking a step closer. "The same fear, the same desperation. It's fascinating." Jessica's heart pounded in her chest. "Emily is dead because of you," she spat, taking a step back. "You tortured her, and now you're trying to do the same to me." "Why?" "Because fear is the most powerful emotion," Matthew replied, his voice calm and measured. "It drives people to their limits, exposes their true selves. Emily couldn't handle it, but you're different. Stronger." Jessica's mind raced as she tried to think of a way to escape. She couldn't let Matthew continue his twisted experiments, not on her or anyone else. She glanced around the room, looking for anything she could use as a weapon. Her eyes landed on a rusted metal rod lying in the corner. As Matthew took another step closer, she lunged for the rod, gripping it tightly. "Stay away from me!" she shouted, holding the rod out in front of her like a makeshift spear. Matthew stopped, his expression darkening. "You can't fight this, Jessica," he said, his voice low and menacing. "I've been watching you for months. I know everything about you. You can't escape." Jessica's hands trembled, but she tightened her grip on the rod. "I won't let you do this," she said, her voice steady despite her fear. "Not to me, and not to anyone else." Matthew chuckled, a cold, hollow sound that echoed through the room. "Well, see about that," he said, taking another step forward. In a sudden burst of adrenaline, Jessica swung the rod at Matthew, aiming for his head. He dodged, but the rod caught him on the shoulder, sending him staggering back. Seizing the moment, Jessica ran for the door, her heart pounding in her chest. She tore through the darkened corridors, her footsteps echoing around her. Behind her, she could hear Matthew's angry shouts, the sound of his pursuit spurring her on. She had to find a way out, had to escape before he caught her. She turned a corner and saw a faint light ahead. Pushing herself to run faster, she headed toward it, praying it was an exit. As she neared the light, she realized it was coming from a partially open door. She burst through it, slamming the door shut behind her and wedging the metal rod through the handles to hold it closed. Jessica found herself in a small room filled with old medical equipment. The faint light was coming from a flickering bulb overhead, casting eerie shadows on the walls. She leaned against the door, trying to catch her breath, her mind racing with fear and determination. She needed a plan. She couldn't stay here forever, but she also couldn't risk running blindly through the hospital. She had to find a way to stop Matthew once and for all. Suddenly, she remembered the tapes they had found in Dr. Green's office. If she could find a way to expose Matthew's actions, to show the world what he had done, he would have no place to hide. She just needed to get back to the office and retrieve the tapes. Gathering her courage, Jessica took a deep breath and opened the door a crack, peering out into the hallway. The coast seemed clear, but she knew Matthew was still out there, somewhere in the darkness. She had to move quickly and quietly if she wanted to avoid him. She slipped out of the room and began making her way back to Dr. Green's office, every shadow and sound setting her nerves on edge. She kept to the walls, moving as silently as possible, her flashlight off to avoid drawing attention. After what felt like an eternity, she reached the office. The door was slightly ajar, just as they had left it. She slipped inside and hurried to the desk, her hands shaking as she rifled through the papers, searching for the tapes. Just as she found them, she heard footsteps in the hallway. Her heart skipped a beat, and she ducked behind the desk, clutching the tapes to her chest. The footsteps grew louder, stopping just outside the door. "Jessica," Matthew called, his voice dripping with malice. "I know you're in here. You can't hide from me." Jessica's mind raced. She needed a distraction, something to give her a chance to escape. She spotted an old, dusty book on the desk and picked it up, hurling it across the room. It hit the far wall with a loud thud, and she heard Matthew move toward the sound. Taking advantage of the moment, she slipped out from behind the desk and bolted for the door. She ran down the hallway, clutching the tapes, her only hope of exposing Matthew's atrocities. As she rounded a corner, she saw a glimmer of moonlight coming through a broken window, an escape route. She ran toward it, clambering through the shattered glass and dropping down onto the grass outside. The cold night air hit her like a shock, but she didn't stop. She ran through the hospital grounds, heading for the nearest road. She had to get away, had to find Alex, had to expose the truth. Finally, she saw the headlights of a car approaching. She waved her arms, screaming for help. The car stopped, and the driver, a middle-aged woman, looked at her with concern. "Please," Jessica gasped. "I need help. Call the police." The woman nodded, pulling out her phone. Jessica collapsed on the ground, clutching the tapes, relief flooding through her. She had escaped. But she knew the fight wasn't over. Matthew was still out there, and she had to make sure he was brought to justice. Jessica sat in the back of the woman's car, clutching the tapes as if her life depended on it. The woman, who introduced herself as Mrs. Harrison, spoke calmly to the police dispatcher, explaining Jessica's situation and the urgency of the matter. Within minutes, the distant wail of sirens filled the air, growing louder as they approached. When the police arrived, Jessica felt a mix of relief and lingering fear. She explained everything to the officers, her voice shaking as she recounted the events. She handed over the tapes, hoping they would be enough to expose Matthew's crimes. The officers assured her they would investigate and took her statement in detail. As they drove her back to her apartment, one of the officers, Detective Morgan, stayed with her, promising to keep her safe. They parked outside her building, and he walked her to her door. "Try to get some rest," Detective Morgan said, his tone kind but firm. "We'll be monitoring the area, and we'll let you know as soon as we have any updates." Jessica nodded, exhausted but grateful. She thanked him and went inside, locking the door behind her. The weight of the past few days hit her all at once, and she collapsed onto her couch, tears streaming down her face. She knew she needed to stay strong, but the fear and trauma were overwhelming. Hours passed in a blur, and eventually, she managed to drift into a fitful sleep. Nightmares plagued her, images of Emily, Matthew, and the dark corridors of the hospital swirling in her mind. She woke up several times, drenched in sweat, but forced herself to stay calm, reminding herself that the police were on the case. The next morning, Jessica woke to a knock on her door. She hesitated, fear gripping her, but then she heard Detective Morgan's voice. "Jessica, it's me. We need to talk." She opened the door and he stepped inside, his expression serious. "We reviewed the tapes. They're damning. Matthew's voice is clear as day, and his methods, they're horrifying. We're issuing a warrant for his arrest." A sense of relief washed over Jessica, but it was quickly overshadowed by a lingering dread. "What if he comes after me again?" "We're not taking any chances," Detective Morgan said. "Well?" Have officers stationed outside your apartment, and we'll keep you informed every step of the way. We will catch him." Days turned into weeks, and the police continued their search for Matthew. Jessica tried to return to some semblance of normalcy, but the fear never truly left her. She avoided the hospital, focusing instead on her volunteer work at other locations. But every shadow, every unexpected noise made her jump. One evening, Alex insisted she come to his apartment for dinner. "You need to get out of your place for a while," he said. "We can watch a movie. Try to relax." Reluctantly, Jessica agreed. She arrived at Alex's apartment, grateful for the distraction. They cooked together, talking about anything but the situation with Matthew. For a few hours, she managed to forget her fears. As they settled on the couch to watch a movie, Alex's phone buzzed with a message. He glanced at it, his expression darkening. "Jessica, I think you need to see this." She took the phone and read the message. It was from an unknown number. "You look happy. Enjoy your evening." Jessica's. Blood turned to ice. Matthew was watching them. Right now. She jumped up, her eyes scanning the room for any sign of him. "We need to call the police," she said, her voice shaking. Alex dialed Detective Morgan, explaining the situation. Within minutes, officers arrived at the apartment, searching the area for any sign of Matthew. They found nothing, but the message was clear. Matthew was close, and he was watching. That night, Detective Morgan assigned 2 officers to stay with Jessica at all times. It was a temporary solution, but it offered a small measure of comfort. She knew she couldn't live like this forever, but until Matthew was caught, she had no choice. The days that followed were a blur of anxiety and hypervigilance. Jessica barely slept, jumping at every sound. She felt like a prisoner in her own home, the walls closing in on her. The police presence in her neighborhood was reassuring, but it wasn't enough to dispel the fear. One evening, Alex suggested they take a drive, just to get out of the apartment. Jessica agreed, hoping a change of scenery might help calm her nerves. As they drove through the city, Alex's phone buzzed again. This time the message was different. "I see you. Always." Jessica's heart raced as she read the words. She knew Matthew wouldn't stop until he was caught. They had to find a way to end this nightmare once and for all. She looked at Alex, her determination clear. "We need to go back to the hospital. There's something we're missing, something that will help us stop him." Alex nodded, his jaw set in determination. "Let's do it." They turned the car around, heading back to the old hospital. This time, they were ready to face whatever horrors awaited them. They knew they couldn't let Matthew continue his twisted game. Together, they would find a way to stop him and reclaim their lives. As Jessica and Alex drove back to the old hospital, a renewed sense of determination washed over them. They knew they had to find something, anything, that would help put an end to Matthew's reign of terror. The oppressive feeling of being watched was ever present, but Jessica tried to push her fear aside and focus on the task at hand. They arrived at the hospital just as the sun began to set, casting long, eerie shadows over the building. The once familiar corridors now felt even more menacing in the growing darkness. With flashlights in hand, they cautiously made their way inside. "We need to find any hidden records or evidence that might tell us more about Matthew's connection to the hospital," Jessica said, her voice steady despite her fear. They headed back to Dr. Green's office, where they had previously found the tapes. This time, they searched more thoroughly, moving aside old furniture and rummaging through dusty cabinets. Jessica's flashlight beam caught a glint of metal under an old moth-eaten rug. She knelt down and pulled the rug back to reveal a trapdoor. "Alex, look at this," she whispered, her heart pounding with excitement and fear. Alex helped her lift the heavy wooden door, revealing a set of narrow, steep stairs leading down into darkness. They exchanged a tense glance before descending into the unknown. The air grew colder and more oppressive as they made their way down. At the bottom, they found a small hidden room filled with dusty medical equipment, old files, and more tapes. Jessica's flashlight illuminated a large metal cabinet with a heavy lock. "This must be it," Alex said, finding a rusty crowbar and prying the cabinet open. Inside were numerous files labeled with patient names, including Emily Parker's. There was also a thick, leather-bound journal that looked like it had been well used. Jessica opened the journal and began to read. It was Dr. Green's private notes, detailing his experiments and his growing concern about his assistant, Matthew. The entries grew more disturbing as they went on. revealing Matthew's obsession with pushing patients to their breaking points and his willingness to cross any ethical line. "He was even more twisted than we thought," Jessica murmured, her hands trembling. Dr. Green tried to stop him, but Matthew was too far gone. As they read further, they discovered notes about a secret network of tunnels beneath the hospital. These tunnels were used to transport patients and equipment discreetly. It was the perfect hiding place for Matthew. "We need to find these tunnels," Jessica said, her resolve hardening. "If Matthew's hiding down there, we can finally stop him." Following the directions in the journal, they navigated through the hospital's basement until they found an old metal door marked restricted access. Alex used the crowbar to force it open, revealing a dark, narrow passageway. The tunnels were cold and damp, with the sound of dripping water echoing through the darkness. Jessica and Alex moved cautiously, their flashlights casting long shadows on the walls. They followed the twists and turns of the tunnels, relying on the directions from Dr. Green's journal. Suddenly, they heard a faint noise ahead, footsteps echoing through the passageway. Jessica's heart raced as they pressed on, determined to confront Matthew and end this nightmare. As they turned a corner, their flashlights revealed a small, makeshift living area. There were blankets, food supplies, and medical equipment scattered around. And there, standing in the center of the room, was Matthew. "Welcome, Jessica," he said, his voice dripping with malice. "I knew you'd find me eventually." Jessica stood her ground, her flashlight trained on Matthew. "This ends now, Matthew. We have everything we need to expose you. The police are already looking for you." Matthew's smile twisted into a snarl. "You think you can stop me? I've been one step ahead this entire time. You're just another experiment." Alex stepped forward, his voice steady. "You're done, Matthew. It's over." In a flash, Matthew lunged at them, but Jessica and Alex were ready. Jessica swung her flashlight, catching Matthew in the face and sending him staggering back. Alex tackled him to the ground, and they struggled until Jessica managed to grab a set of handcuffs from her backpack, securing Matthew's hands behind his back. Panting and shaken, Jessica and Alex dragged Matthew out of the tunnels and back to the main part of the hospital. They called Detective Morgan, who arrived with a team of officers to take Matthew into custody. "It's over," Jessica said, watching as Matthew was led away in handcuffs. "It's finally over." Detective Morgan approached them, a look of relief on his face. "You both did an incredible job. We'll make sure Matthew pays for what he's done." Jessica nodded, feeling a weight lift off her shoulders. She knew the road to recovery would be long, but for the first time in weeks, she felt a sense of peace. As they left the hospital, Jessica looked at Alex, gratitude and determination in her eyes. "Thank you for standing by me, Alex. We did it." He smiled, putting an arm around her. "We did. And now, we can finally move forward." Jessica knew there was still work to be done, but she was ready. With the support of her friends and the knowledge that justice would be served, she could face whatever came next. With Matthew finally in custody, Jessica felt a sense of relief she hadn't experienced in weeks. However, the emotional scars of her ordeal were still fresh, and she knew she had to work through them. She continued to attend therapy sessions and leaned on her friends and family for support. Jessica's story had garnered significant attention, and she was soon invited to speak at various events about her experience and the importance of mental health awareness. She decided to channel her trauma into something positive by expanding the Emily Parker Foundation. The foundation would now focus not only on helping victims of stalking and psychological abuse, but also on raising awareness and advocating for stronger protections. One afternoon, while organizing an event for the foundation, Jessica received a call from Detective Morgan. "Jessica, can you come down to the station? We've received a confession from Matthew." Her pulse quickened. "What did he say?" Morgan hesitated. "It's better if you come down and hear it for yourself." Jessica arrived at the station, her mind racing with possibilities. When she entered the interrogation room, she saw Matthew looking gaunt and defeated. He avoided her gaze, but the tension in the room was palpable. Detective Morgan sat next to Jessica. "Matthew has agreed to speak with you. He wants to explain his actions." Matthew finally looked up, his eyes hollow. "Jessica, I'm sorry for everything I did to you. It was never supposed to go this far." Jessica felt a surge of anger. "Then why did you do it? Why torment me and so many others?" Matthew sighed deeply. "I was a puppet. Ethan manipulated me, used my fears and weaknesses against me. He was the mastermind behind everything. I thought I was in control, but I wasn't." Jessica's eyes narrowed. You still made your own choices. You could have stopped. I know, Matthew said, his voice breaking. I was weak. Ethan promised me power, control over my life, but all he did was destroy it. I'm truly sorry for what I did to you and to Emily. Jessica remained silent for a moment, letting his words sink in. What about Ethan? Did he have other plans? Other victims? Matthew nodded. He had a list. People he considered interesting subjects. He was obsessed with fear, with seeing how far he could push someone before they broke. You were one of many. Jessica's stomach churned. Do you have that list? Matthew looked at Morgan, who produced a worn notebook. We found it in Ethan's cabin, Morgan said. We're already working to locate and warn the people on the list. Jessica took a deep breath, feeling a mixture of relief and dread. Thank you for telling me this, Matthew. I hope you understand the gravity of what you've done. Matthew nodded, tears in his eyes. I do. I'll live with the guilt for the rest of my life. As Jessica left the station, she felt a sense of closure. The confession and the list of potential victims added a new layer of urgency to her work. She threw herself into the foundation, using her platform to raise awareness about the dangers of psychological manipulation and the importance of mental health support. Months later, the foundation held a gala to honor the victims and survivors of stalking and psychological abuse. The event was a huge success, drawing attention from the media and gaining support from various influential figures. Jessica stood at the podium, looking out at the sea of faces, and felt a profound sense of fulfillment. Thank you all for being here tonight, she began. This foundation is not just about helping those who have been hurt. It's about preventing future harm, about educating and supporting our communities. It's about turning pain into strength and fear into hope. As she spoke, Jessica saw faces in the crowd that she recognized survivors she had helped, families who had lost loved ones, and allies who had joined the fight. Her eyes landed on Margaret, the elderly nurse who had given her Emily's journal. Margaret smiled and nodded, tears glistening in her eyes. After the speech, Jessica mingled with the guests, listening to their stories and sharing her own. She felt a sense of connection and purpose stronger than ever before. The night was filled with laughter, tears, and a shared determination to make the world a safer place. Toward the end of the evening, as the guests began to leave, Jessica found a quiet corner to reflect. Alex joined her, a proud smile on his face. You did it, Jessica. You turned something horrible into something beautiful. She smiled back, grateful for his unwavering support. I couldn't have done it without you, Alex. Thank you for always being there. He took her hand. We've come a long way, and we'll keep going together. Jessica knew there was still work to be done, but she was ready. With the support of her friends and the knowledge that justice had been served, she could face whatever came next. The nightmare was over, and a new chapter in her life was just beginning. In the following months, the foundation continued to grow, helping countless individuals find safety and support. Jessica's story, along with Emily's, became a beacon of hope for many, a reminder that even in the darkest times, there is always a way forward. As Jessica prepared for another event, she received a letter from a young woman named Lily, who had been inspired by her story. Your bravery gave me the courage to escape my own nightmare, Lily wrote. Thank you for showing me that I'm not alone. Jessica smiled, feeling a sense of pride and fulfillment. She knew that her journey had made a difference, and she was determined to continue fighting for those who needed help. The future was filled with hope, and she was ready to embrace it. Years had passed since Jessica first encountered the nightmare that changed her life. She now stood on a stage in Washington, D.C., at the National Conference on Mental Health and Public Safety. The room was filled with policymakers, mental health professionals, survivors, and advocates from across the country. The foundation she had started in Emily Parker's name had grown into a nationwide network, helping thousands of people find safety and support. As Jessica approached the podium, she took a deep breath, reflecting on the journey that had brought her here. She had faced her fears, uncovered the truth, and turned her pain into a force for good. Now she was ready to share her story once more and advocate for even greater change. Good evening, everyone, she began, her voice steady and strong. It is an honor to stand before you today, not just as a survivor, but as a voice for those who cannot speak for themselves. My journey started with fear and despair. but it has led me to this moment of hope and resilience." She paused, looking out at the attentive faces in the audience. "Years ago, I was a volunteer at an old hospital, unaware of the horrors that awaited me. I was stalked and tormented, my life turned upside down by two men driven by twisted obsessions. But through the darkness, I found strength. I found a way to fight back, not just for myself, but for all those who have suffered in silence." Jessica recounted her experiences, the investigation that led to Matthew and Ethan's capture, and the creation of the Emily Parker Foundation. She spoke about the countless individuals who had found help and healing through the Foundation's work, and the importance of community and support in overcoming trauma. "Our mission is to provide resources, counseling, and legal assistance to victims of stalking and psychological abuse," she said. "But it is also to educate, to raise awareness, and to advocate for stronger protections. We must ensure that no one else has to endure what Emily and so many others went through." She then introduced several survivors who had joined her cause, each sharing their own stories of fear and resilience. Their testimonies were powerful, highlighting the urgent need for continued efforts to address these issues on a national scale. As the conference continued, Jessica participated in panels and workshops, discussing strategies for improving mental health services, enhancing public safety measures, and supporting victims. She met with lawmakers, urging them to pass legislation that would provide better protections and resources for those affected by stalking and psychological abuse. One of the most impactful moments came when Jessica met with a group of young people who had been inspired by her story. They were passionate about creating change in their own communities, and she encouraged them to keep fighting for what they believed in. "You are the future," she told them. "Your voices matter. Use them to make a difference. Stand up for those who can't, and never stop fighting for a better world." The conference concluded with a gala dinner, where Jessica was honored with the Lifetime Achievement Award for her contributions to mental health advocacy and public safety. As she accepted the award, she felt a deep sense of gratitude for everyone who had supported her along the way. "This award is not just for me," she said, her voice filled with emotion. "It is for Emily, for all the survivors, and for everyone who has fought alongside us. Together, we have made a difference, and together, we will continue to create a world where everyone feels safe and supported." Back at her hotel room that night, Jessica looked out at the city lights, reflecting on the incredible journey she had been on. She had faced unimaginable fear, but she had also found a community of people who shared her passion for making a difference. Her work was far from over, but she knew she had the strength and support to continue fighting for change. In the following years, the Emily Parker Foundation continued to grow, expanding its reach and impact. Jessica traveled the world, sharing her story and advocating for better protections for victims of stalking and psychological abuse. She collaborated with international organizations, bringing her message of hope and resilience to a global audience. Through it all, she never forgot the people who had inspired her journey. Emily Parker's memory remained a guiding light, a reminder of the importance of compassion, empathy, and the unbreakable human spirit. Jessica's work had become a beacon of hope for countless individuals, proving that even in the darkest times, there is always a way forward. As Jessica stood on yet another stage, addressing a crowd of eager listeners, she felt a profound sense of purpose. Her journey had come full circle, from victim to survivor to advocate, and now to a leader in the fight for justice and safety. "Together, we have the power to change the world," she said, her voice ringing with conviction. "We have the power to turn fear into strength, pain into purpose, and despair into hope. Let us continue this fight. For Emily, for ourselves, and for all those who need our help. The future is ours to shape, and together, we will make it a better, safer place for everyone." And with those words, Jessica knew that her journey was far from over. She had found her calling, and she was ready to keep fighting, inspiring others to join her in creating a world where everyone could live free from fear and filled with hope. Jessica's book tour took her across the country, where she met countless people whose lives had been touched by her story. Each stop was an emotional experience, filled with tears, hugs, and words of gratitude. She shared the stage with survivors, advocates, and mental health professionals, all united in their mission to raise awareness and provide support for those affected by stalking and psychological abuse. One evening, after a particularly moving event in Seattle, Jessica sat in her hotel room, reflecting on how far she had come. The journey had been arduous, filled with moments of fear and doubt, but it had also been incredibly rewarding. She thought about Emily Parker, whose tragic story had set her on this path, and felt a deep sense of purpose. Emily's legacy lived on through her work, and that gave Jessica strength. The phone rang, interrupting her thoughts. It was Detective Morgan. "Jessica, I hope I'm not calling too late." "Not at all, Detective," she replied, her curiosity piqued. "What's up?" "I wanted to update you on something important," Morgan said. "We've been able to reach out to everyone on Ethan's list. Thanks to your foundation's resources and the awareness you've raised, we have managed to provide them with the support they need and ensure their safety." Jessica felt a wave of relief. "That's wonderful news. Thank you for letting me know." "There's more," Morgan continued. "Several of those individuals have expressed interest in joining your cause. They want to share their stories and help others, just like you've done." Jessica smiled, her heart swelling with pride. "That's incredible. It's exactly what I hoped for, to turn our collective pain into a force for good." After hanging up, Jessica felt a renewed sense of determination. She decided to reach out to these new allies and invite them to join her on the next leg of her tour. Their stories, combined with hers, would create an even stronger message of hope and resilience. The next event took place in New York City, drawing a large crowd eager to hear from Jessica and the newly joined survivors. The atmosphere was electric, filled with anticipation and emotion. Jessica stood on stage, looking out at the faces of those who had come to listen, and felt a surge of confidence. "Thank you all for being here," she began. "Tonight we stand together as a testament to the strength of the human spirit. Our stories may be filled with pain and fear, but they are also filled with hope and resilience. We are here to support one another, to learn from each other, and to make sure no one ever has to face their fears alone." She then introduced the new members of her team, each sharing their personal journey and the impact Jessica's foundation had on their lives. The audience was captivated, moved by the courage and determination displayed on stage. As the night went on, Jessica realized that her mission had grown beyond her own experiences. It had become a collective effort, a movement driven by the voices of many, all working toward a common goal. She felt a profound sense of gratitude for the people who had joined her, and for the lives they were able to touch together. After the event, Jessica mingled with the attendees, listening to their stories and offering words of encouragement. She was approached by a young woman named Lily, who had traveled from a nearby town to meet her. "Jessica, your story saved my life," Lily said, tears in her eyes. "I was being stalked by someone I thought I could trust. I didn't know where to turn until I read your book. It gave me the courage to seek help and protect myself." Jessica hugged Lily tightly. "I'm so glad you're safe now. You're incredibly brave for taking that step. Remember, you're never alone in this." As the tour continued, Jessica's foundation expanded its reach, opening new centers and offering more resources to those in need. The support from the community was overwhelming, and the impact of their work was evident in the countless lives they touched. One day, Jessica received an invitation to speak at a national conference on mental health and public safety. It was a prestigious event, attended by policymakers, law enforcement officials, and leading experts in the field. She knew it was an opportunity to make a significant impact and advocate for stronger protections for victims of stalking and psychological abuse. Standing before the large audience, Jessica felt a mixture of nerves and excitement. She took a deep breath and began her speech, sharing her journey and the importance of addressing these issues on a larger scale. "We need to create a world where everyone feels safe, where victims are believed and supported, and where perpetrators are held accountable," she said passionately. "This is not just a personal issue. It's a societal one. We must work together to ensure that no one else has to endure what Emily, myself, and so many others have gone through." Her speech was met with a standing ovation, and she received numerous pledges of support from influential figures who were moved by her message. It was a pivotal moment in her advocacy work, opening doors to new partnerships and initiatives. In the years that followed, Jessica's foundation continued to grow, helping thousands of people across the country. Her book became a staple in schools and universities, educating young people about the importance of mental health and the dangers of stalking. She was honored with several awards for her contributions to public safety and mental health advocacy. But the true reward was seeing the positive change her work had brought about. Jessica's journey from a terrified victim to a resilient survivor and advocate had come full circle. She had turned her pain into purpose, creating a legacy of hope and support for others. Emily Parker's memory lived on through her work, a constant reminder of the strength and resilience of the human spirit. As she stood on stage at yet another event, looking out at the sea of faces filled with hope and determination, Jessica knew that her mission would continue. She had faced unimaginable fear and emerged stronger, ready to help others do the same. Her journey had made her a symbol of courage and resilience, inspiring countless others to find their own strength in the face of adversity. "Together we have the power to change the world," she said, her voice ringing with conviction. "We have the power to turn fear into strength, pain into purpose, and despair into hope. Let us continue this fight, for Emily, for ourselves, and for all those who need our help. The future is ours to shape, and together, we will make it a better, safer place for everyone." And with those words, Jessica knew that her journey was far from over. She had found her calling, and she was ready to keep fighting, inspiring others to join her in creating a world where everyone could live free from fear and filled with hope. Years had passed since Jessica first encountered the nightmare that changed her life. She now stood on a stage in Washington, D.C., at the National Conference on Mental Health and Public Safety. The room was filled with policymakers, mental health professionals, survivors, and advocates from across the country. The foundation she had started in Emily Parker's name had grown into a nationwide network, helping thousands of people find safety and support. As Jessica approached the podium, she took a deep breath, reflecting on the journey that had brought her here. She had faced her fears, uncovered the truth, and turned her pain into a force for good. Now, she was ready to share her story once more and advocate for even greater change. "Good evening, everyone," she began, her voice steady and strong. "It is an honor to stand before you today, not just as a survivor, but as a voice for those who cannot speak for themselves. My journey started with fear and despair, but it has led me to this moment of hope and resilience." She paused, looking out at the attentive faces in the audience. "Years ago, I was a volunteer at an old hospital, unaware of the horrors that awaited me. I was stalked and tormented, my life turned upside down by two men driven by twisted obsessions. But through the darkness, I found strength. I found a way to fight back, not just for myself, but for all those who have suffered in silence." Jessica recounted her experiences, the investigation that led to Matthew and Ethan's capture, and the creation of the Emily Parker Foundation. She spoke about the countless individuals who had found help and healing through the Foundation's work, and the importance of community and support in overcoming trauma. "Our mission is to provide resources, counseling, and legal assistance to victims of stalking and psychological abuse," she said. "But it is also to educate, to raise awareness, and to advocate for stronger protections. We must ensure that no one else has to endure what Emily and so many others went through." She then introduced several survivors who had joined her cause, each sharing their own stories of fear and resilience. Their testimonies were powerful, highlighting the urgent need for continued efforts to address these issues on a national scale. As the conference continued, Jessica participated in panels and workshops, discussing strategies for improving mental health services, enhancing public safety measures, and supporting victims. She met with lawmakers, urging them to pass legislation that would provide better protections and resources for those affected by stalking and psychological abuse. One of the most impactful moments came when Jessica met with a group of young people who had been inspired by her story. They were passionate about creating change in their own communities, and she encouraged them to keep fighting for what they believed in. "You are the future," she told them. "Your voices matter. Use them to make a difference. Stand up for those who can't, and never stop fighting for a better world." The conference concluded with a gala dinner, where Jessica was honored with the Lifetime Achievement Award for her contributions to mental health advocacy and public safety. As she accepted the award, she felt a deep sense of gratitude for everyone who had supported her along the way. "This award is not just for me," she said, her voice filled with emotion. "It is for Emily, for all the survivors, and for everyone who has fought alongside us. Together, we have made a difference, and together, we will continue to create a world where everyone feels safe and supported." Back at her hotel room that night, Jessica looked out at the city lights, reflecting on the incredible journey she had been on. She had faced unimaginable fear, but she had also found a community of people who shared her passion for making a difference. Her work was far from over, but she knew she had the strength and support to continue fighting for change. In the following years, the Emily Parker Foundation continued to grow, expanding its reach and impact. Jessica traveled the world, sharing her story and advocating for better protections for victims of stalking and psychological abuse. She collaborated with international organizations, bringing her message of hope and resilience to a global audience. Through it all, she never forgot the people who had inspired her journey. Emily Parker's memory remained a guiding light, a reminder of the importance of compassion, empathy, and the unbreakable human spirit. Jessica's work had become a beacon of hope for countless individuals, proving that even in the darkest times, there is always a way forward. As Jessica stood on yet another stage, addressing a crowd of eager listeners, she felt a profound sense of purpose. Her journey had come full circle, from victim to survivor to advocate, and now, to a leader in the fight for justice and safety. Together, we have the power to change the world, she said, her voice ringing with conviction. We have the power to turn fear into strength, pain into purpose, and despair into hope. Let us continue this fight, for Emily, for ourselves, and for all those who need our help. The future is ours to shape, and together we will make it a better, safer place for everyone. And with those words, Jessica knew that her journey was far from over. She had found her calling, and she was ready to keep fighting, inspiring others to join her in creating a world where everyone could live free from fear and filled with hope.